Welcome to Look, Look and Look Again, where we love things retro and things all culty and hip. Let me take this opportunity to guide you into rounds of TV's yesteryear, where it was daring, innovative and progressive, and no snowflake or member of the white middle-class liberal elite interfered in broadcasting in their pious way for the cause and crusade of political correctness. I hope to cover film and television and share my passion, some knowledge and some facts with you, so it inspires you to look, look and look again. On today's show, it's...
All irregularities will be handled by the forces controlling each dimension. Transuranic heavy elements may not be used where there is life. Medium atomic weights are available. Gold, lead, copper, jet, diamond, radium, sapphire, silver and steel. Sapphire and steel have been assigned.
There is a corridor, and that corridor is time. It surrounds all things, and it passes through all things. You can't see it, only sometimes, and it's dangerous. You cannot enter into time, but sometimes time can try to enter the present, break in, burst through, and take things, take people. The corridor is very strong. It has to be. But sometimes, in some places, it becomes weakened, like fabric, worn fabric. And when there is pressure put upon fabric, time comes in. Thus spake the words of Joanna Lumley, who played the delectable Sapphire from the series Sapphire and Steel, which we're going to look at and look again on episode 2 today. Sapphire and Steel, in my opinion, was one of the most unique television science fiction dramas ever made. Although I had already started a liking towards Doctor Who on BBC One at the time, it didn't really scare me that much, even though I was about 5 years of age. My earliest recollections of Doctor Who was Nightmare of Eden and the Stellar season, which had City of Death and Destiny of the Daleks and Horns of Naimon. That was the first vivid memories of the adventures of the Time Lord that I had, and it left a lasting impression on me. I can't recall really scurrying away at the show behind a sofa, come to think of it, although I was absolutely fascinated by the Mandrels and by the Naimon and by the Daleks. However, with regards to Sapphire and Steel, that did make me grab a cushion. At the time, I suppose it was so ethereal, even at a very young age. I was fascinated and genuinely concerned about the stories, from what I can remember. And of course it was a joy to revisit and look again when it was released on DVD and prior to that on video. The show was originally shown in 1979 on the ITV network in a Tuesday and Thursday night format. The programme was unique in its conveyance of menace, a claustrophobic menace, and the inescapable, using the crudest resources by our standards to date available to work in favour rather than work against. We can see an example of the televisual medium at its very best in Sapphire and Steel, It was a brew of the bewilderingly paranormal and the perplexing marriage of science fiction with an edge towards thriller that was wholly addictive. It made compulsive viewing, and it seemed to really exercise the imagination, very thought-provoking. The show even seemed to be, at times, it made fantasy seem plausible, as it blended the elements of ghosts and time theory, and as time as the enemy, and time itself is something to be harnessed and kept in order by Sapphire and Steel, who were the time detectives. The initial show was called The Time Menders before it was renamed Sapphire and Steel. The whole show was created by P.J. Hammond, who was the writer, and he expertly crafted old historical sensation with new modernism to create a scary, almost alien menace that seemed so otherworldly, but so close to home at the same time. It's as though that the stories were plausible. As I said, it ran from 1979 to 1982, consisting of a mere 6 stories. This intensely claustrophobic and eerie slab of fantasy emerged from the corridors of ATV, which is in the UK ITV independent television that covered the Midlands area, and it was thanks to Sir Lou Grade that this show actually made it to screen. Although people that were in charge of the production companies back then were to make a profit and to get as rich as possible, it's just that back in the golden age of TV, the balance was just right, and despite the fact that money was needed to be made, they seemed to stick their neck out in producing some shows that would not be made today, simply because they would not generate the audience, and they would not be able to create a franchise from something. So you had that glorious experimental way of programming that produced some of these programs that are now icons of cult television and have got a cult following. You do get series today that are made today that do generate a cult following and have started, which is good to see, but these are mainly produced by the cable television stations that are available over in America, for example, programs like The Walking Dead, etc., whereas the more mainstream organizations that you get that are there seem to follow a textbook way of writing and a textbook way, almost a cookie cutter form of safe television. And of course we also have the fact that a lot of the television companies today, especially the BBC, are absolutely petrified of offending any minority. But back then anything seemed to sort of like go with regards to experimentalism, which produced real creativity with the people involved in the production of the programme. So back to Sapphire and Steel. The series was actually commissioned on the strength of one episode penned expertly by P.J. Hammond. An allowance of $2,500 per episode was negotiated and was given a 5:30 p.m. transmission slot initially in the schedules. When the 2 leads were announced as David McCullum and Joanna Lumley, the casting allowance was raised to £10,000 per episode and the time slot moved to 7:30 p.m, which also meant that the scariness and could be tweaked slightly, and the intensity of it moved up a couple of notches. So in a total 36 episodes were made. After its 4-year reign, the series ended for good. This was allegedly due to an amalgamation of things. There was the costs of the special effects, high production charges, and the irregularity of the actors' availability. In 1982, ATV also became Central Television, with the outbid changing the face of the station and its output programming, like many other regional stations at the time. This also put an end to our Time Detectives assignments. Viewed in contemporary times, the imagination evident throughout the series still bursts through. The expert use of facilities available, the lighting, and the successful usage of sound with music can be seen, and you simply can't help admiring it. Sapphire and Steel has been quoted and referred to as the precursor to the infinitely inferior X-Files, and I say inferior because they just had better technology when the X-Files came along. They had more media whoring for the X-Files, and let's face it, after the 4th season of the X-Files, this became the stereotypical US cannon fodder, where some of the episodes eventually became very hit and miss rather than consistently decent, and there's only so much you can flog a dead horse. Sapphire and Steel was leagues above this show and has never quite been equalled. So let's have a look at the episodes and the stories. Adding, I believe, to the mystery of the stories was that they had no real reference point. The first 5 could easily be shown out of synchronization to the non-anal viewer, and they wouldn't even notice, to be honest with you. The 6th story is a kind of ending, but not a definite one that you really do need to make of it what you will. The video releases came about in 1992 and refer to them as adventures, and the recent DVD releases as assignments. Fans of the show have also contributed their own titles. To confuse matters more, I'm going to create my own titles, but will also refer to them as they were initially intended: Story 1, Story 2, etc, etc. It was also rumoured that PJ Hammond was the originator of some of the episode titles for fans to freely use. This is in fact bollocks. So let's introduce the stories. I hope I haven't pissed off too many ardent purists with my version of titles, but I do think they are quite cool. I've tried to amalgamate the best of the titles used from various sources. So we'll have Story 1 and we'll call it The House of Clocks. We'll have Story 2, Soldier at the Station. Story 3, Revenge of the Beasts. Story 4, Picture Man. Story 5, The Virus of Dr. McD. And Story 6, Johnny Jack. Let's have a look at the first story, which was Story 1, which I'm going to call House of Clocks, which ran for 6 episodes on the ITV region, transmitted from the 10th of July 1979 to the 26th of July 1979.
Someone was killed in this room. A young girl. And it wants me to be hurt. It wants it to happen all over again. Steel, don't! The girl's killers are here. They've broken down the door. Steel! It's gone! The room's gone! But they haven't!
So let's look at the plot. So in this episode, we had a remote house by the sea. Upstairs, little Helen Jardine is being read her favourite nursery rhymes, which is Ring a Ring a Roses. Nice reference there to the plague, before she goes to bed. Downstairs, dutiful son Robert is studying. All that can be heard are the faint voices of the parents and the ticking of the several clocks that seem to dominate over the sounds of anything else. A rhythm of time's measurement. Then the clocks stop. Rob discovers his parents have vanished, and his younger sister has been left apparently traumatised by some terrifying act of the paranormal. Rob contacts the police, and in a matter of minutes, there's a bang at the door. Sapphire and Steel have been assigned. Sinister child's rhymes, ghostly manifestations of plague victims, and roundheads intent on decapitating Sapphire are linked to a crack in time's surface, which could ultimately destroy every living thing in the present time. This story featured the character of Led, who made his first and sadly only appearance in this story, written by PJ Hammond, directed by Sean O'Riordan. And the most outstanding moment, as you've seen from that clip, is Sapphire is trapped in the picture at the top of the stairs and will soon be at the mercy of the ghosts of the past. Amazing stuff. We now move to Story 2, which is the Soldier at the Station, which lasted for 8 episodes and was shown on the ITV region. It was transmitted from the 31st of July 79 to the 8th of November 1979. Now that seems epic in itself, but there was a little bit of a to-do with this because of the strikes that were happening at the time on ITV. When this was first shown, a strike occurred after episode 4 in the HTV, Ulster, Thames and Southern television regions. Episodes 3 and 4 were not broadcast at all. For these regions, the entire adventure was shown from the start when the strike was over. The dates above are inclusive of these lost months, which occurred for the whole of September and almost all of October. Bar one day, in fact, as the story resumed on the 31st of October 1979, most fitting. So in the second story, in a disused railway station, George Tully, middle-aged amateur ghost hunter, sets up his paranormal equipment and waits for communication. The train station is a hive of spiritual activity, and it isn't long until eerie paranormal activities begin to manifest themselves. Sapphire and Still are assigned to investigate as the ghosts of military personnel, maybe due to a more sinister, more evil entity than any human being could ever imagine. They face the darkness, a malevolent force that feeds upon the resentment and anguish of people who have died prematurely. Tormented spirits of 3 experimental submariners suffocated to death. A pilot tragically killed one flight before from D-Mob, and the sad character of Sam Pearce, a World War I private blown up on Armistice Day. They seem to grow in strength and number as the darkness feeds on their tragedy. In an attempt to contact them, Sapphire is taken over by the darkness and Still is transported to a battlefield, seemingly trapped without the ability to return to stability and safety. This is a really truly stunning performance by Gerald James playing Tully, the amateur ghost hunter, and spot-on performances from the minor cast member makes this a truly first-class sophisticated viewing experience. It was written by PJ Hammond and directed by Sean O'Riordan and David Foster. Gentleman that plays Sam Pearce, the actor Tom Kelly, has does a stellar performance combining angst, sadness, melancholy, and it's very, very moving. It's probably one of the most powerful images and also the most outstanding moment of this show for me that has lasted for all my years, and memorably scary was an episode ending, and that's when Sapphire and Still look down from a building window to the platform and more of the melancholy and angry spirits appear. They begin to en masse, signifying time may be winning, fueled by retribution and with destructive intent. Chilling, powerful stuff, especially the bit where they have a seance and Sapphire herself gets possessed by the darkness. Amazing. Let's have a look at a clip from that.
Well, you have been busy in my absence.
Eleanor! Look.
I do remember a flower.
What kind of flower? That's a pasque flower.
A wild flower. Its petals are a kind of purple.
Well, they're rare.
It's very beautiful. I think it's very rare. But I don't know why I remember it.
Come next Easter tide and pick that pasque flower.
They suffered. Why do they have to suffer so much?
They told you?
No, I sensed it.
What's the solution?
What?
The answer to their problems, whatever it is the darkness has promised them. Did you sense that?
No, that was kept from me.
But you know that they were waiting?
Yes.
What for? For more of their kind, then what?
I don't know.
Were they optimistic?
Yes.
But you still don't know where they were going?
No.
But you do know they were definitely going somewhere?
Yes, the darkness promised them that.
Why is it morning? I'm sorry, but you see, I also fell asleep. And I don't sleep.
Then we move on to Story 3, Revenge of the Beasts, a 6-parter, which was shown ITV Regional, dated 6th of January to the 22nd of January 1981. The story is an odd one, this, considered by many to be the weakest entry. I disagree and refer to Story 5. It also features one of the most surrealistically unforgettable animal attacks ever seen. Rothwin and Eldred live in an invisible experimental time capsule 1,500 years into the future. It is situated on a block of flats in contemporary time. By contemporary, that would be 1981 when the show was screened. Time starts to menace a couple and their sibling, and this energy, time itself, is resentful that they are the only animals left alive from extinction. Sapphire and Still are assigned, sensing the detective's purpose. Time attacks both of them. The baby begins to change rapidly and becomes a changeling, going through stages of adulthood at an alarming and abnormal rate. Amidst the danger and disorientation enters Silver, another elemental. The three attempt to restore and rectify the imbalance caused by an unknown menace intent on destruction. This is the only occasion when location shooting was used, and it's also the first appearance of the excellently suave Silver, played impeccably by David Collins. The story was written by P.J. Hammond, directed by Sean O'Riordan. The most memorable moment for me is when Steele is on the top of a high-rise block of flats, a step away from plunging death. He is measuring the capsule area, and time senses this, and the manifestation of energy affects a pillow. This heads from the bedroom to outside, right the way up to the top of the block of flats. It advances on Steele and originates to its organic representation, which is a goose. It screeches, pecks and claws at Steele, pushing him to the edge of a fatal fall. Something for the vegans there. Poor old Steele, trapped on a tower block, about to be attacked by a rather nasty goose. It's not something you see at, or you would expect to see at 7:30 now. I mean, another thing as well, as I can remember, bearing in mind I was only very little when this was shown, was the scene where there was real slaughterhouse pictures played in the background as well. So it's quite a nasty little story, and very, very grim, to be honest with you, but thoroughly surreal and thoroughly enjoyable. Awesome stuff. So to me, this isn't the worst or the weakest of the stories. We've got one more brilliant example of Sapphire and Still, and then we move to what, in my opinion, is the weakest, which is story 5. Just like the second story, story 4 is another premium example of Sapphire and Still, which I'm going to call Picture Man. It was 4 episodes, and it was transmitted from the 27th of January to the 5th of February 1981. Another classic story, wonderfully penned, taut direction and convincing characterizations, even by child actors who usually let the side down. Wonderful stuff and pure magic. The story itself centers around an antiquarian bric-a-brac shop, and in this shop something here has gone terribly wrong. The old landlord has simply vanished and has been replaced by another who no one seems to remember what he looks like. Ruth, a lodger, is witness to these bizarre events and stumbles upon something that leads to her disappearance as well. So Sapphire and Still are assigned to investigate and prevent further danger to the only source of information left, who is a prostitute called Liz. Together they reveal that the old landlord used to splice old photographs with the new, and therefore this has acted as a trigger for a tear in time. Time manifests itself into the Shape, who is a faceless identity that moves through time zones via photographs. The horrifying truth about Ruth's disappearance is revealed, and in a bid to save her, Sapphire and Still become trapped, leaving only Liz to save them. But can a mortal stand up to such a terrifying entity? We have to buy the DVD and find that out. I think probably there's a few things, and the most outstanding moment in this is it has to be the revelatory instance when we discover the shape is in fact featureless. The actual shape itself is very Magritte-esque, shall we say, and with borderline surrealism. Another chilling moment is when the character of Ruth is trapped in a photograph in a house, and the shape gets hold of the photograph and consequently sets fire to it, and poor Ruth is left in there screaming as she burns to death. Story by P.J. Hammond, directed by David Foster. Brilliant performance by Alison Spiro, the actress who plays Liz. And there's also there's some other brilliant bits in this, like the little children themselves that appear. They appear to be ghosts at first, and then all of a sudden there's an instance where Liz goes to cuddle one of them and they promptly turn to photographs and collapse and crumble as she hugs them. Very disturbing stuff indeed.
As I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd stayed.
Each and every photo is mine. They all belong to me. Trees and towns and villages, all made of paper. And paper burns. Paper burns. Nothing lasts. Only me.
Find every photograph of you that there is. Never have another taken.
Right, okay. Story 5 was the virus of Dr. McD, which ran for 6 episodes. Its transmission date was the 11th of August to the 26th of August 1981. Just goes to show how badly syndicated this wonderful series was. It's a tepidly interesting Agatha Christie-based yarn, some occasional flashes of inspiration, but quite an easily forgettable tale on the whole. Its story centres around the celebration of the 50th anniversary of his business partnership with the recently deceased Dr. George McD. It's about a chap called Lord Arthur Mulreen who decides to throw a fancy dress party where all the props are genuine antiques of the time. You can sense something bad is going to happen here. At the party, time breaks through, causing the date to regress by 50 years. Sapphire and Steel are assigned. The guests who were not alive at the time are being destroyed one by one. Further discovery, and as the plot unfolds, it confirms that Dr. McD had created a virus that would wipe out the whole of humanity. An incident that happened prevented the virus from being released. Now time has reversed. It's determined to ensure that the history is changed and a global apocalypse actually takes place. I suppose the most memorable moment for me personally, it's just one of those little touches, those little nuances that meant so much. And what I thought was good was when a tape of a 1930s cricket match plays hidden behind a deco radio for authenticity. When checked at a later stage, after time breaks in, the tape has gone, but an orchestra from 1930 is still being broadcast. But on this occasion it is in real time, signifying time has begun its menace. This one wasn't penned by P.J. Hammond. It was written by Don Houghton, the gentleman who wrote, and Anthony Reid, who were known to Doctor Who fans. It was directed by Sean O'Riordan and features some pretty decent performances by Patience Collier, who plays Emma Mulreen, and also Nan Monroe, who plays Felicity McD. Not a bad little story on the whole, but as I said, probably the weakest out of the 6.
I'm sorry you've been disturbed. Aren't these cultures?
Get out of here!
You shouldn't have done that, George. He was only asking a civil question.
I've nearly solved it.
That temper of yours will give the company a bad name.
It's impossible.
No, Steele, there's no doubt about it.
There never was a fire
There
in
would be
here.
a massive carbon residue. There is none.
The computer clearly
This room has
indicated
never
the whole
been
room was
all the
destroyed.
materials
Not
used
now,
in the
Felix.
construction are
You mean there's not even a
pre-1930s.
trace?
There's a trace as there used to be a fireplace over there, and it... Steele.
June the 22nd.
And so we then move on to story 6, which I've called Johnny Jack, which was a 4-parter and was shown and transmitted from the 19th of August to the 31st of August 1982, which was sadly the last story. Arriving at a petrol station, Sapphire and Steele meet an old man from 1925, a travelling entertainer from 1957, and a couple from 1948. The couple seem unaware of the time mix-up, and a tambourine seems to provide clues to many unanswered questions. The time detectives are joined by Silver again, and all three seem unaware that the whole thing is a fatal trap set up by the transient beings, arch rivals of Sapphire, Steele, Silver, or from the very race that they originate from. So the most outstanding moment in this story, which was sadly the last one, was definitely the ending sequences and the final last shot. Most uncomfortable, and also generates that feeling of claustrophobia. And so Sapphire and Steele ended and disappeared into the ether. One can tell that we're back into P.J. Hammond territory after the previous story. We're now back into the realms of more of the esoteric, more of the surreal, and more of the downright spooky. It was a very sad ending, which probably is quite ambiguous really, and as I said before, you have to make of it what you will. The series ended here, but I'm sure that should have things been different, the stories could have continued and placed our time detectives at different moments in time, battling time itself. Bit of a shame, but nevertheless it ended on a relatively high note.
They're like us, Steele. But they're like us.
Same as us.
Well, almost.
How do they differ?
I think they answer to a higher authority.
So there you have it. That's how Sapphire and Steele ended. Well, not so much for that clip, because there was more to that story, but it was quite poignant, that moment, which led to understanding as to the nature of the time trap that our heroes and protagonists are caught in. So when I was referring to the Magritte aspect, I was in no way insinuating artistic parallels, as we're looking at two very different forms of medium, i.e. television and the art form itself on canvas. I can see the surrealistic ingredient though throughout the series, and that to me is what makes the show so wonderful and its obvious appeal to me. As with the surrealistic art movement, Sapphire and Steele paradoxically resisted the appeal to a mass audience. On a human level, we tend to ignore what we do not understand, rather than acknowledging a space to be filled in our heads. so it is with no wonder that the show didn't become ITV's Doctor Who. The popularity it did receive was mainly because of the two impressive leads. Whatever stories surfaced from the rumour mill about whether Lumley and McCullum got on or whether it was all purely professional beckons validity. But I defy anyone that could come up with two actors more fitting for the demanding roles and the gamut of emotions that both of them displayed throughout the 6 stories. This was initially what the show was sold on, and although we are told what they do of sorts, a minuscule amount of other facts. But one of the greatest mysteries is that's never answered outright, who Sapphire and Still really are. We have two perfectly juxtaposed individuals who live up to their namesakes. Let's have a look. Still is hard and unyielding, but has the odd instances of emotional weakness that, when surfaces, hinders rather than helps the situation on hand. Sapphire, on the other hand, comes across more warmer, almost human, you might say. She plays the role of adjudicator, advocate and sage to Steele's more hands-on and practical methodology. Her unworldly psychic power is more on display and apparent than her counterparts. She has the ability to take time back, witnessing incidents before they happen. She can make time by stalling it, ideal for someone who's always late for work and invaluable for saving the cosmos. As Wonder Woman in the series Twirl calls an exciting fizz, as you could depend on something groovy was about to happen, the same feeling actually occurs, but to a more deeper degree, when Sapphire uses this aspect of her abilities, which was her trademark, was when time went backwards, the eyes went an iridescent blue, and this wonderfully haunting sound permeated the soundtrack. Sapphire can also tell the compound and age of objects, as well as, worryingly, sense the date of someone's death, an ability we all fear of having. Still relies on Sapphire's ethereal and super psychic ability, and only demonstrates similar traits when he communicates telepathically, and not forgetting Steele's party piece of reducing the temperature to absolute zero, like he did in the clip earlier and from the first story, when he freezes the picture in order to save Sapphire. They both epitomise the quintessential detective lineament of hot and cold. Neither opposes each other's methodology, although Steele does incessantly and forcefully bully Sapphire sometimes into going that little way further when she appears at her maximum level. Unfortunately, due to her sensitivity, she also bears the brunt of many a pissed off manifestation. Poor lass gets whisked off to other dimensions, gets possessed by forces beyond explanation, and feels strong emotions that Steele can only ever dream of having. Indications that the two are not always briefed at the same time can be witnessed in instances throughout the series where they seem to arrive at the same location, but their initial hooking up is actually delayed. So from surrealism and a scratch upon the surface of who these beings are, we can venture into the enigmatic territory. From the powerful opening sequences, we are told basic information, but it is very rudimentary and leaves one bewildered equally. The thirst for further enlightenment has therefore already captivated the intelligent viewer right from the outset of the opening credits of the show. Even the lack of episode titles and identity adds to the mystery and timelessness, even before we analyse the stories. Another success of the show is that it's kind of avoided aging miserably like other shows screened around this time. So the hairdos, the clothes and interiors may seem very late 70s, but the whole contemporary aspect has not been stifled by these. If anything, the late 1970s, early 80s feel seems to be there because that just happens to be the time period our heroes are based. So it can be argued why they shouldn't appear in dress and appearance specific to the date where they are rooted. This base is just a temporal home rather than a permanent dwelling time. The series fits within the loose confines of fantasy, but has about a quarter of that firmly rooted in science fiction. Having this harsher complement enables the subject of time to be dealt with more credibly. Time is no longer manipulated by humans as yardsticks for routine. Time in the show is an entity. It is a kind of living thing. It too can control, and the more the series develops, the more we realise time is a force so powerful that it will never let up. Therefore, Sapphire and Steele's briefings aren't based on the destruction of it, but the containment of it within the constraints of this fabric boundary. Having established that the detectives are based in our current period, we have time also represented as paranormal. Old, bygone objects become sacrosanct and can ultimately be very, very dangerous. Age is attributed to such objects that all act as triggers for when time becomes very bad. These are always measured and dated from the present time, should we go along with the Big Bang Theory. The names of our titular detectives are done for euphonic purposes, as neither is a single element in themselves. Sapphire is aluminium oxide and Steele manufactured from iron and carbon. Therefore, this could explain why the time detectives are so important to each other. One covers what their other team member lacks, perhaps. Some of the other medium atomic weights from the opening credits mentioned are pure elements, namely gold, lead, copper, radium and silver. Diamond is another form of carbon, and jet a polished ignite, rock formed by partially decomposed vegetation, and therefore another form of carbon which traces of hydrogen, oxygen and magnesium. You can tell I went to school and had an interest in that sort of thing, shamefully. Well, not so shamefully, but there we are. It is noticeable to the very observant that lead is replaced by mercury in the title's narrative for story 6 and the third episode of story 4, so perhaps the series was looking at introducing that character. One of the other praises are for the noteworthy supporting cast throughout the show. Their integrity to the plot can at times be as pinnacle and essential as the lead characters. In story 1 and lesser degree story 4, the child actors and actresses are most convincing. Some of the stage school droids churned out then and now can be toe-curlingly bad and can let a whole episode down due to the way that they have been mishandled by the director, but that doesn't seem to happen here. Gerald James's performance, as I said in story 2, as George Tully as the doomed ghost hunter is absolutely spot on. Praise for the ghosts that haunt him as well. They come across as genuinely scary, but just as sad. The sadness, however, is touching, but not used as a weakness, for it's that emotional drive of sadness that is causing the instability and the desire to exist until justice is satisfactorily carried out. No wonder this tale is the most fondly remembered. That's story 2. Visually and technologically, the story works well. The haunting possession of Sapphire as she is taken over by the darkness, rendering her face to nothing more than organic decay, is one of many superbly executed pieces that nightmares are only made of. Sean O'Riordan skillfully crafts sadness and claustrophobia in story 2 and milks it for all it is worth for maximum impact. Eldred and Rothwin, featuring in story 3, are relatively weak in comparison to the other characters that their predecessors and also their successors, but this letdown is superseded by David Collins' portrayal of the puckish Silver. Led's a little bit of a letdown as he comes across as a guffawing stereotype that wouldn't be out of place in Uncle Tom's Cabin, but setting this minor affectation aside, Led is also a welcomed addition as we see more of the mystery mentioned at the very beginning in the credit roll. So these characters are actually being brought in, so I'm wondering if the series actually went on, whether we would see these characters now and again helping Sapphire and Steele when things get really out of control and they require some extra power that only their contemporaries have. We also mustn't forget the human characters, and Alison Spiro's character in the fourth story, who plays Liz, sees a return of a strong character in the form of a tart with a heart. Therefore, identifiability and fondness for the audience, we can see that this is merely face value, because as a plot unfolds, Liz's integrity to the story is absolutely essential, as ultimately it's her, and she is the one that saves Sapphire and Steel from entrapment by the haunting, Magritte-esque faceless man. The fifth story, as I said, is the worst, I feel, and the characters plod their way through a confused sentimental plot. There is a small display of ham from the male entourage, and some of it seems like a badly filmed episode of a game show murder mystery. I'm afraid it is more Cluedo than Christie. However, that doesn't seem to spoil one's enjoyment of Story 5, as it still could be used as an example of a slice of decent television, still blowing most of our contemporary British and American import dross out of the water that we have now. There is the odd gruesome incident to stop the spectator from dozing, but Story 5, it all ends rather hurriedly and swimmingly. Wacko. Another contender for the best of crown has respectively been saved for last. Story 6 combines all the elements that made the other stories work so well, and they're delivered gift-wrapped. Force fields, ghosts, rhymes of a bygone age, and people from different time zones are all staple ingredients to this cracking yarn from P.J. Hammond. There are thankfully no flash gadgets and no over-the-top graphics, but there is plenty of atmosphere and scares by the bucket load, which compensates for the simple special effects on display. It is because of this simplicity, I believe, that the stories are so credible. I feel anything CGI or similar would dumb down the impetus, as the viewers would be distracted from what quality the show is really offering the viewer in terms of performance and script. Story 6 also sees the focus switch from people in jeopardy to solely on the main leads. So theoretically it turns things on its head by having the two main leads who come in and save and come in like the cavalry. They are the ones that become the ones in jeopardy. Silver always makes a welcome return, but a big question mark is over his exit. Did he manage to escape? If he did, maybe he freed Sapphire and Steel in an adventure we could only ever imagine, but would never be able to see. The programme uses the detective story idiom, owing more to Agatha Christie for all it would be Chandleresque overtones, and yet its science's magic approach is retrospective of H.G. Wells' spacious and part sincere rambling at the beginning of The Time Machine about the nature of time. Sapphire and Steel are time detectives, and yet the crimes they sleuth are more like misguided accidents. Each story, I notice, follows the same principality. Something goes wrong with time, people reappear from it, and vice versa, and then enigmatic malignant forces try to distort and machinate time to the point it wants to destroy humanity, as well as the unpredictable behaviour of time itself. Our duo's job, as we said, is to restore the balance and general status quo to make things okay again. The pair profess that they have emotional deficiency, but most definitely comprehend it and could be seen to be displaying it in others. They may be alien with dispassion, but their sense of values are very humanistic. It seems they have lost their aptitude to express it rather than never having it in the first place. There is also an undertone of sexual frisson between the characters. Only once do I recall Steele mentioning the word love, and that was in a highly cant manner. He is also jealous of Sapphire's attention to Silver's flirtatious manner and praise. Steele can also, on the other hand, be extremely waspish towards Sapphire in some of the episodes, and these instances last the majority of screen time. However, I would prefer that, because a cuddly Steel, no, perish the thought. If we hypothesize that Sapphire has feelings for Steel, she could have a soft spot for his inner child, who on the surface seems acrimonious and aloof when it comes to displaying any affection. Minimalist without sacrificing realism is the order of the day for the feel of the show. All the houses and buildings that feature in it are cobwebbed derelicts. Settings and costumes are naturalistic and sparse. Colours are recherche, palettes of sepia, grey and blue are permanent, washes to the supernal settings. I hope you can see these from the screenshots that I've provided throughout, and also through some of the clips. The number of sets used for each set are very few and fairly basic, but all of this works so well, thanks once again to O'Riordan's superlative camera work, and of course the scripts and the acting. Another thing that brings this to life, and an important ingredient as flour is to bread, are the quality performances by the supporting cast. Their talents are truly first rate, making the unbelievable even more believable. It is with a crestfallen heart that I realise we will never see a show of this calibre and style again. The demand for vulgarity has overtaken the quality aspect that used to be for the viewing public first and foremost. However, to note, things don't actually end there, because Big Finish, who do the Doctor Who adventures, and they've also done some Avengers episodes, missing episodes with David Kill and Patrick Macnee as John Steed. They've also did some CD adventures, and when I was been listening to those, they are surprisingly nifty little adventures with not too much change to disappoint the fan of this series. Fortunately, they also managed to use the original theme tune that gives it that little seal of approval, and I'd like to thank them for keeping this show alive. I'd also like to give praise and thanks to Network DVD, who have released this series, and I would urge anybody that has sat throughout this rather long duration of Look, Look and Look Again to purchase the DVD and really enjoy these episodes. All the clips and pictures that I've used through this, I hope falls under fair use, because I've needed this to explain the history and the journey of Sapphire and Still, and no copyright infringement has been intended here. I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this little sojourn in the realms of Sapphire and Still. And if you have liked this, and please hit the like button and also subscribe, because I'm hoping for more Look, Look and Look Again episodes where we have a look at some more cult television or cult movies for a change. So those are another thing that I'm hoping to review at a later stage. So until the third episode, I bid you a very good day. Take care now. Bye bye.